Welcome and thank you so much for joining this webinar, which is celebrating the launch of the new roadmap towards water security for food and drink supply. My name's Karen Fisher and I am the Head of Climate Action at Robb. And whilst we wait for people to join the session, just a quick outline of the plan for the hour. So firstly, we wanted to give a bit of context for developing this roadmap, and you'll hear a bit of context from me, but also from a few other people. And then we wanted to bring this context to life a little more. And to do so, we have some excellent speakers that will talk through some of the project examples and the kind of case studies from action on the ground in this space. We hope to leave at least 15 minutes for panel Q&A. So if you have any questions at any point throughout the session and from the speakers, please do drop them in the Q&A box and we will pick them up in this panel Q&A session, and then briefly we'll flag how to get involved. So firstly, context. I'm just going to stop my video for a second. So context on, firstly, why we've developed this and also the reasoning for the approach taken. The first key point of context is really that we cannot produce our food and drink without water, but the predictions regarding future availability of water are stark, both globally affecting overseas supply chains, and in the UK, the statistics are pretty scary, and in some places this is having a commercial effect already. We'll hear later from Shelly about the context of South Africa, for example. And it's now widely recognised that both in the UK and globally, we need to take action to adapt to a changing climate as well as reducing emissions. And safeguarding water resources is really central to that. What is also central to that is protecting nature. And nature also needs water to thrive and survive, but agri-food chains are increasingly linked to declining water quality, which is driving biodiversity loss and species decline at an alarming rate. On the right-hand side of the slide here is just one example of an effect that is affecting the agricultural production, fruit and veg production in one key sourcing area in southern Spain. And really this kind of points to a bigger challenge. So amongst other issues, this is a real reputational challenge for food and drink businesses. This being one example from Spain, there are many others increasingly in the press from across the UK or more globally. And agri-food chains are also put pressure on local water supplies if they're not well managed. So you'll probably be aware of some of the examples around asparagus, around avocados. And on the picture on the right here is a picture of an asparagus farm in the Peruvian desert, which I think kind of just visually shows the context here. And these pressures are likely to increase with climate change. And all of these things in combination mean that water is becoming a material and a very real commercial issue, for example, for investors. And we know that water-related risks are a material climate risk for agri-food in the context of things like TCFD reporting. But agri-food is disproportionately affected because of the amount of water withdrawals that are used for agricultural production, and also the points earlier around links to pollution. And we also know that actually not all regions of the globe are affected equally. So we do need to be mindful about focusing our efforts. And really this is a big and a complex challenge, and knowing what to do can be a very difficult perspective for food and drink businesses, but we do know that the framework for action to reduce the risks faced and improve resilience in supply chains actually is very well defined. So the image here is of the WWF water stewardship ladder, which includes a series of actions that businesses can take, starting with improving awareness and knowledge of impacts of the business and of supply chains, moving up to internal actions, so water management at site level type actions, but then moving towards looking beyond sites to the broader catchment context. And that's really important because water is a shared resource within a catchment and water issues are very localised. So collective action at catchment level is needed to realise any kind of meaningful change and address the risks faced. But collective action is very challenging for businesses. So that's really where we have been focusing effort to date. So what we've done, working with the Rivers Trust, working with WWF and others on the ground, is establish a series of pilot projects to really test and learn whether by working together we could have a meaningful effect and influence the outcomes in some of these really important sourcing areas for UK's food and drink. I won't go into any more detail now on this because you'll hear later from Kate and from Shelly about kind of giving a bit more colour of kind of what's happening in on the ground in these projects. But what we have found is that the approach has been effective, and that by working together, we have been able to shift the dial on some of these issues at a local level. And because of that, we decided to continue and extend our level of ambition. Firstly, by setting a new target for Courthold 2030, voluntary agreement with the food and drink sector, back in the summer. So this new target for Courthold extends the ambition to act out to what we've defined as a top 20 of the most important product and ingredient sourcing areas for the UK and in the UK and overseas. So we'd be looking to work collectively using the model developed in the top 20 sourcing locations and really to focus effort in selecting those so that we have good coverage of sourcing locations, but we are acting in the most important areas with reference back to that risk map earlier. We want to focus effort where water stress is greatest. And that's really, I guess, the background to developing this roadmap and why we've been taking this approach. The roadmap itself is a mechanism for delivering on that target. So it includes a set of actions for food and drink businesses and actions specifically for retailers, for manufacturers and processors, for hospitality and food service businesses, and then a set of collective milestones. And then alongside that, importantly, it includes a delivery framework, and that includes a number of the organisations that you'll hear from today, as well as many others, establishing really a network of collective action projects for businesses to tap into. Alongside that is a reporting framework so we can track and make sure we are on the right track and we are making progress and having the outcome that we are collectively seeking. So from just that more general background of how we've developed the roadmap, at this point I wanted to hand over to Andy Roby, who is Senior Water Security Advisor at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, to update on some more recent important international policy developments that provide some context for this roadmap. I will stop sharing my screen at this point. Andy, is it okay if I hand over to you?
believe it. Hi, Karen. I'm
Hello.
really sorry, my computer's just rebooted and none of the buttons are working. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay, yes.
I will speak and then eventually the video will come to life.
Brilliant.
So yeah, forgive me for that. Yeah, it's really great to be here. Thanks, Aaron, for reaching out. And it's a good example of being aware of what's going on and being able to work together. And I'm really pleased to be here because I think what I'm hoping from this engagement is going to be a convergence of a partnership between this Glasgow Declaration that you've asked me to talk about and the water roadmap. More of that later. But very quickly, I'm Water Security Advisor in the Climate and Environment Directorate of the FCDO. We've had a very busy year with COP26, and I don't want to go on about that too long, but my responsibility is leading on water policy for UK government in the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office. My background is actually forestry, and I've worked a lot with responsible business and on trade issues. But for the last 3 years, it's been water, water, water everywhere, not a lot to drink, not enough to drink. And that's true for so much of the world, which is why we developed the Glasgow Declaration on Fair Water Footprints. It really was a moment, I think, when a number of us in the water sector were saying, why have we not had a plastics moment like the David Attenborough plastics moment, when the world recognized plastics as an issue? We need that. Why has it not been taken seriously? Well, we've got a bit of a plan to address this, and it's through COP27 and the UN Water Summit, and we'd very much like you guys to be part of this, to raise the voice of water because it's been fairly absent. And it really started with a call to action by my boss, the Minister Lord Goldsmith, at the World Water Week in August. And this led to an accelerated formulation and signing of a declaration dubbed Glasgow Declaration on Fair Water Footprints. And thanks for putting up a slide. I'm really sorry the video is still not working, and I do not know why. This has never happened before. I do some new kits, but you know what budgets are like centrally. So at this declaration, we got amazingly short period of time, 8 countries to sign up to this, and a number of other organisations of whom you'll recognise the likes of Diageo, Unilever, and I believe Sainsbury's too were a partner. Of the countries, the UK, Finland, the Netherlands, and Austria represented consumer nations, and Malawi, Peru, Madagascar, and Panama represented producer nations. But we've ambition to grow much larger and to work together on tackling this question of water management. And in the context of developing the declaration, it became clear that we've already doing a lot in this space, not just the RAP work, but also as backdrop, the 25-year environment plan, which has very clear commitments to lighten our impact, the UK's impact globally. And from that, we realized that the Joint Nature Conservancy Council had developed something called the Water Footprint Calculator in order to work out what the UK's impact was across a range of products, including forests and carbon. But there's a really good water calculator in there, which I encourage you to look at. So at COP26, water appeared as a water pavilion in the blue space appropriately, but in fact it was everywhere in what was being discussed and negotiated. And what we want to do at COP27 is make sure that water and this global crisis is recognized, and then we can step into the UN Water Conference, the Water Summit in March 2023, and make sure that the world is taking water and water insecurity seriously. Because over 70% of climate change impact is water related. So since COP27 will be in Egypt, we already know that they are keen to prioritize water. It is a golden moment. And this is where you guys come in. We need to hear more from the voice of business. Likewise, we're working strongly with civil society to build accountability. And we're very keen to work together with you And as one of the architects of the Glasgow Declaration have already agreed to join your oversight board, that's Water Witness International, then we have an opportunity to converge and work together. And just finally, what do we bring? Well, we bring government, essentially. This is politicians that have created the political space for dialogue, for partnership, and for reform, both internationally and at the water basin level. We've also got development aid to assist this, and we're going to be helping poorer countries to build their capacity to manage water better. And finally, there's the value of aligning consumer country policies, standards, regulations, and markets with producer country priorities and policies, so we are in lockstep. So we're really excited about this moment, and congratulations, Karen, and your team, and the many others around the table today for getting where we are now. You're lucky not to have to see me. I'm really sorry. I will close now, but hand over back to Karen for the rest of the session.
No problem, and thanks so much for joining us, Andy, and persevering and for talking us through that, because it's a real game changer. Right, so before we move on to some project case studies, it would be helpful to hear from a business perspective on why action on water is important and the value of working together. So firstly, we have Alice Ritchie from Tesco. And Alice, are you there? Brilliant.
Hi. Cool, thanks so much, Karen. And BRAP, congratulations, this is so exciting. We're delighted to be a supporter of the BRAP Water Roadmap. I think looking at that list of supporting organisations, what is really exciting is that the vast majority are ones that we as Tesco, and I think most retailers, already have within our supply chain or work with directly, like the environmental groups like WWF and Rivers Trusts and things like that. This roadmap, therefore, is a really powerful tool for us. It allows us to work collectively as businesses and know that we're all working towards a common goal. We're all, we have the same stakeholders, we're talking in the same language, structures, governance and information things. We're really able to work collaboratively, which is so exciting. I'm still relatively new in my role as the Sustainable Agriculture Manager at Tesco, but as I've been kind of learning more about the business and supply chains and across the different sectors and things like that, I think this will be incredibly empowering to have behind, knowing that when I'm talking to sustainability leads with some of our key suppliers and things, I know we're all on the same page when it comes to such an important issue like water. So I do think it's really fantastic. Also looking at that list, I think, you know what, if there's people that aren't on that list that we think should be on there, it's our role as retailers. We've got a responsibility to make sure we're bringing everyone on board and that everyone is committed to the same targets. And we know, and I'm sure we'll continue hearing today, that insecure water resources and declining water quality globally are incredibly important issues, and they're only going to be tackled if we're all working together. So we've got a responsibility here, I think, to be incentivizing action within our own supply chain, but also across the wider industry. I've loved also reading through the roadmap and seeing such a big focus on nature and nature-based solutions. Our sustainable agriculture agenda at Tesco has 4 key pillars: water, climate, biodiversity, and soil. And I really think that effective water management through nature-based solutions is kind of where they all intersect. And it's where we're going to see some really amazing solutions that will be helping us achieve our net zero goals, contributing less to biodiversity loss, things like that. So for us, I think it's going to mean finding some really ambitious and innovative ways to incorporate nature and kind of regeneration of habitats into every element of the food system, really, top to bottom. A lot of this work is already underway, and this is going to give us the momentum to really keep pushing it. We do a lot of this work through our industry-leading partnership with WWF that's moving into its 4th year, and a lot of that's around targeting water management in some of the priority sourcing areas that are listed in the roadmap. So it's really exciting to also have colleagues from WWF, Connor and Shelly, on the webinar as well today, so I'm looking forward to hearing from them. But I think from a Tesco perspective, the roadmap's 5 key reasons on why we need to be taking action align really well with our core purpose, which is to serve our customers, communities, and planet a little bit better every day. Unsustainable water management really threatens the core of our business as a food retailer. So it's within our own interests really to be advocating for transformational change, but it goes so far beyond that. I think to achieve net zero, to protect nature, to be investing in communities around the world, and to be adapting to the impacts of climate change, which we know we're already seeing and are devastating, we do need true collaborative action from big businesses. So this is why I think this roadmap is going to be a really great tool for action, and we are really thrilled to be supporting it. Thanks so much, Karen.
Well, thank you as well. Thanks for supporting and raising some excellent points that I didn't get a chance to get in my intro, particularly around nature-based solutions, which I know is something that is close to your heart as well, Andy. So we've got Andy Griffith from Nestlé UK and Ireland. Andy, I guess the same question to you. Why do you think it's so important to acting, and what's the value of doing it together?
Yeah, thanks, Karen, and a real pleasure to be here today on the launch of the Water Roadmap, a really important next step in terms of delivering the outcomes we need to see. I think the good news is that yourself, Alice and Andy have provided great context, so as listeners you won't have to spend too long listening to me, so always an upside. Yeah, for us it's really crucially important, and I think if you look at where the whole journey in water has come from, I think for a lot of organisations water hasn't really featured as a priority issue, or if it has, it's perhaps been seen more through a lens of kind of CSR, the traditional CSR and credibility with consumers and media. What's becoming really, really evident, more so for a broader range of businesses, is to your earlier points, Karen, the real criticality of water in terms of business resilience. And that's not just for our operations, but that's across our agricultural supply chains as well. We've seen some horrific instances, even just in the last 12 months, the flooding in Germany, significant droughts. We saw the images earlier on of the impact of diffuse pollution on a global scale, but also we're seeing it within the UK as well. So we've seen real challenges in terms of significant floods in Cumbria and other parts of the UK, but also, and something I never thought I'd see, real challenges in terms of water availability in southwest Scotland, which historically hasn't been particularly well known for its challenges in terms of water availability. So we have some real challenges that we're facing into. From a Nestlé perspective, we've been taking action for a long time and clearly see that for many organisations, the first route in line with the ladder is about understanding what your water footprint is, engaging your employees, and then really looking at taking operational action. And that's a really great step for businesses to take to start moving on that journey. As a result, we've been able to reduce our water use by over 60% since 2007. We've got zero river water abstraction in the UK and Ireland as well across our operations. But then looking really at how you can leverage those broader water stewardship opportunities within the landscapes within which you operate or source. And I think what's really crucial is, as Alice alluded to, no matter how big you are as an individual organisation, we're never going to make the scale of change required. So what's really important in terms of this roadmap is providing clear guidance and support to bring a whole range of organisations together, not just businesses, but NGOs and other actors who can help deliver those impacts on a shared ambition basis to really drive action within those landscapes. So for me, this is really important. And I think for organisations who are perhaps still struggling, thinking about how you can position this as a business resiliency proposition, aligning with the investor requests that are coming through in alignment with Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, and looking at how, again, to Alice's point, we can leverage those water stewardship and nature-based solutions within those landscapes to drive real change.
Thanks, Andy, and some really practical points there. If you've got any questions for Andy or for Alice, please do pop them in the chat, and we're going to move on to some practical examples now of how this has been working in practice. I'm just going to share my screen again. We have got Kate Speke-Adams from the Why and Ask Foundation first, and then Shelly Fuller from WWF South Africa taking us through a bit more colour, and then we will come on to the Q&A panel after that. So, Kate, if you are there.
Hi, everybody. Just going to give you a bit of an insight into the different ways businesses and farmers and growers have been engaging and delivering in the Y. If we go to the next slide, Karen. So just for anyone who isn't aware, the Y and Usk catchments are over on the border between England and Wales, intertwined down the length of the rivers, and they're really, really important water catchments in terms of water. For drinking water, we supply a huge amount of water to Birmingham and to Gloucester. We've also got really iconic landscapes down at the bottom of the catchment with the Wye Valley AONB. It's an extremely important location for tourism and recreation. I think we've got some pictures to add on here, Karen. As well as providing, you know, the substrate in order to produce a really diverse menu of foods. You know, we've predominantly a livestock area and now we're diversifying into soft fruits and root crops, all sorts of things. But with all of those benefits, we also face a number of really serious challenges within our catchments. Soil runoff is a really significant problem for us. We've got complex topography, quite high amounts of rainfall and reasonably easy eroded soils. So we often see our watercourses running sort of typically sandstone red after rain. We have issues that a lot of our rural communities suffer from quite extreme flooding. We also have had some really extreme droughts with the river. I don't know if you can see the sort of second down on the right. The river was almost dry for stretches last summer, and that is only becoming more severe as climate change really takes its grip. And then the final picture down on the bottom right is the algal blooms that have been occurring in the Wye. They have happened for a number of years, but those weather conditions appear to be making it more severe. And we've been working with Lancaster University, who've been doing a phosphate project, and that has found that actually we're about 2,000 tonnes of phosphate in excess in the Wye from human and agricultural sources every year. So you can see how some of that could easily be ending up in watercourses and causing the algal blooms that we're now seeing really choking the life out of our rivers. Okay, thanks, Karen. So my brief today was really to try and give people an insight into the different ways that you can help deliver collective action. You know, we're working with a huge number of farmers and growers in our catchments. Really, our advisors are jack of all trades. They can help provide advice on, you know, how to manage your watercourses, whether you might like to try undersowing maize, accessing into government grants, whether they're Welsh or English, you know, digging in the ground, looking at soil health, and also providing opportunities for discussion on farm with events, you know, running field trials, funding action as well. So we're administering grants directly from our projects, whether that's to support undersowing maize or improvements on free range units, you know, helping with yard infrastructure. We're trying to always direct money as efficiently as possible down to action to deliver benefit on the ground. Okay, Karen. So an example of this, we've got Lower Hope fruits, and I've seen already some other people on the call. I think we've got who will be glad to see this as a case study. This is a mixed farm in North Herefordshire with a fruit enterprise, reasonably compact. This is one of their sites, and we've done the same approach on all of their soft fruit enterprises now. What we're trying to look at is the risk of flooding, nutrient loss, and the image you can see that's the colourful map, that's a SciMap. It's a Durham University tool that we use to understand how water flows through a field, through the catchment, where it might be generated, how it's sort of funneled into a watercourse. So what we've done here is there is already reservoirs for irrigation, and we've added in some sediment traps because there was a big issue with sediment from the uppermost field coming down, which was compromising the water quality and eventually the storage capacity of those reservoirs. And we're using that also to try and help buffer those high flows. So it offers a benefit to the rural properties downstream that were suffering from flooding from this brook. So there's already a big benefit to the local community from the work that's being done here by Lower Hope. We've also integrated nectar mixes on this farm to try and add pollinator benefits, but also to try and take out high risk areas to create buffering and settlement. Then through stewardship schemes, we've also installed a really brilliant network of tracks and cross drains so that any runoff that might happen during heavy rainfall is directed where it is safe to go, rather than, you know, generating a huge amount of velocity and potentially eroding some of those soils and entering the brook at a fair pace. And as you can see, there's buffer strips planted all over the place. So what we've tried to do is break those flow lines, add in things that are beneficial to the business. I can say that all of the team up at Lower Hope are very pleased with the track system. They say we're, you know, motoring around the site now. It has a big impact on efficiency. So the key opportunity for us is finding those items that are beneficial to water, but also, you know, make a difference to the business as well, because they're obviously much more likely to be taken up and then maintained in the long term. Okay, next slide. Yeah. If you're a processor working within one of these catchments and you're thinking, okay, how could I get involved? You know, there are lots of different scales of involvement, and there's lots of companies that we're already working with who have just been able to host introductory meetings so that their suppliers and growers can meet their local team and understand what support and advice, whether there's any funding that's available. Quite a few of the local businesses that we're working with have also used it as a really valuable opportunity to understand how the assurance schemes are delivering for water, because quite a few assurance schemes have really majored on animal welfare for a number of years, and in fact, you know, aren't quite so tight on water, and that's why we're trying and enhance that as well. So it's been a really useful opportunity for those sort of reviews to take place. Some businesses obviously circulate information of, you know, upcoming events, opportunities for funding through their network of suppliers, which is really simple. There's not necessarily a cost fee for those businesses to participate and be supportive, but it does demonstrate that they're sort of being responsible and proactive in how they're trying to support their supply chain. Okay, next slide. So as a little case study here, we've got a project with Muller as part of the Tesco partnership. They were approached to say, you know, there's this project taking place. They shared with us their local supply base, then hosted a meeting to introduce us to those growers. They've, you know, continued that dialogue the whole way through the project. They've integrated some of the engagement sort of elements of that project into their QVIS compliance scheme, so that the people participating get points towards their assurance schemes by being involved and taking action to deliver benefits for water. 70% of those suppliers have been engaged with the project, and we've spent about 15k now delivering improvements on those farms where there were opportunities for better clean and dirty water separation. We've done a lot of maize undersowing in that area as well. A lot of these sites are down in Monmouthshire, so yeah, rainfall and soil runoff is a high risk, and the producers that have participated have match funded all of that work with about 30k, so it's been really positive and it's a great first step in helping to support them. Okay, Karen. Then for any other retailers, I mean, at the moment in our catchment, we're working really closely with Tesco, M&S and Co-op. I won't go too many over these things because, you know, Alice has just outlined it, but if we go to the next slide as well, we are delivering this partnership with Tesco and WWF, and this is a kind of image of how that supply chain and that relationship has worked. You know, Tesco have been just fundamental at engaging that sort of top-down approach, and we can then help demonstrate what we're delivering from the bottom up in that kind of reporting. So there's been a lot of work looking at assurance schemes, and yeah, a lot of the work that we've been doing has obviously been with the Muller sites, and a lot with Noble and Anglia with their free range growers. And thankfully, lots of the soft fruit growers also working in with Tesco, Berry World and Total World as well, Total World Fruit. So I'll leave those ones there. I think my next slide is just a thank you. There's lots of businesses already working with us. Hopefully I haven't forgotten anybody, but that gives you a bit of a whirlwind tour of what people could be doing.
Thank you. Yes, that's super helpful just to get an understanding of how it works in practice. And I've stopped sharing because next I think, Shelly, you're going to share your slides directly.
Yes, thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Kate.
And thanks, Kate. Let me know if you can see my screen. I'm going up to full screen. Here we go. Let's move this down. Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be part of this exciting launch. And yeah, I applaud the RAP team and all the Courthold signatories for their commitment to continuing the efforts as well. I'm from the WWF South Africa team, and I work in sustainable fruit and wine supply chains. And I'm going to just showcase the Water Ambition project that we've been running in South Africa for the last 1.5 to 2 years. COVID kind of came into play a bit, but essentially it's about developing a collaborative supply chain that supports the South African growers, supplying the UK market. And as you've heard from previous speakers, it's really about initiating impactful water stewardship projects within the critical catchments. And the challenge has always been, escalating what's being done at a farm level and facilitating that up to a catchment scale. So I represent a team. We've got 2 catchment coordinators, one in each of the strategic water source areas. And it's thanks to the funders below and the Courthold signatories, Tesco, Sainsbury's, M&S, Co-op, and Worldwide Fruit. So yeah, let's take a little trip across the sea to South Africa. So essentially, yeah, within WWF, of course, we are continually endeavoring to produce food for society, but in a way that is actually actively restoring nature. And I think, living through the pandemic as we are, it's even more close to all of our hearts, how reliant we are on nature and how our impacts make a difference. So we've released a number of really easier to read documents and reports that I recommend the audience having a look through, particularly one called Farming with Biodiversity, which is really trying to highlight nature positive production options that can be at scale. So essentially starting on managing what you're doing as a business, particularly those businesses that have farm roots, and then proactively restoring the land that you're working on and the land from which your services come from, and then protecting the natural areas that provide the water, the healthy soils, and the clean air. And not only at a government level and through businesses like those on the call, but the power of the market and the conscious consumer choices. I think we're seeing more and more how the ripple effect of those purchasing power can really make a difference for society. So yeah, in essence, it has been particularly in South Africa, but at a global scale, just trying to connect society with nature, and that it's actually exactly where our food comes from and what our economy is based on. And within South Africa, we've got a lot of work to do. So trying to hone in on where we work and how we work at scale and with the most impact. We've done some work to identify these water factories within the country. And this is just a map. You won't be able to read the detail, but essentially those little colorful blobs are the strategic water source areas. So essentially the water factories of the country. So although they only cover 10% of the country, they provide 50% of our surface water needs. So we've committed to working with partners and driving any funding and initiatives to these strategic water source areas so that we really can hone in on the efforts and make that change. So in the Western Cape, which I've zoomed into now, the area that we're working in as part of the Courthold and Tesco partnership, that statistic increases even more. These two strategic water source areas, the Grootwinterhoek in the lighter color and the Boland, effectively supply 80% of the water needs. And so if we are going to improve water usage and improve the ecosystem function, these are the areas we really want to focus in on. Specifically, obviously, for agriculture, as 70% of the water comes from these mountain catchments. So these are areas that are actually mostly privately owned. So at a national scale, unlike other countries, only 16% of these mountain catchments are actually formally protected. In other words, they will be safeguarded for future generations. So that's why we find it very important to work with the stewards of the land, the farmers, the landowners, the water users, because they really are the custodians of not only the fruit basket that we eat, but also of the water and the biodiversity. So in the Western Cape, it's also a biodiversity hotspot, a globally recognized area for our biodiversity. And so again, these farms and the landowners are the custodians of that. And this initiative was kickstarted in South Africa because we were just coming out of a 3-year drought, the worst drought in living memory, where this is normally one of the main dams, water sources essentially for the city of Cape Town. And it was a desert during that time. And it obviously had an impact, as you saw, up to, in some areas, up to 30% decrease in yield of some of the fruit, not only for the export market, but locally. And obviously that has had a knock-on effect in terms of livelihoods, small and large-scale farming operations, and job security. And thankfully, not being a competitive space, but actually the Courthold signatories realized that as this is a critical supplying region, let's rather work together to establish projects that will help buffer the impacts of climate change and support the work at a catchment scale. And so that's how the Courthold Initiative was established. And in terms of identifying where, this map is a slightly different version, but you can see the similarities here, the one strategic water source area, the Grootwinterhoek, and here the lighter blue, the Boland water source area. And the pin drops are the main supplying farms. So the key fruit farms going into the Tesco, Sainsbury's, Co-op, and M&S supply chain. And it's a natural overlap in terms of where we decided to work. And again, as I say, it's wonderful that it's not just one business saying, we just want to work with our suppliers. What can you do just for our farms? Because water doesn't know boundaries. And to get to that collective action, it's about working with all of the suppliers who most often overlap and supply multiple. So in the two areas, you'll hear in my talk, the Koa Bokkerveld, so the cold regions up here where a lot of the home fruit comes from, apples, pears, stone fruit. We have placed a coordinator there, and in the Groenlandberg, the also apple, pear, and also great wine region. That position is funded by Tesco and was the first to be appointed in July. And so I've mentioned that, yeah, these are critical catchments for the supply of water downstream. And but not only that water factory, but also where the nutritious food comes from. And so not only these Courthold signatories, the local retailers and our landscape partners realized that we need to focus our resources together to build the resilience in these areas and to get greater impact. And so the power of partnerships is really strong take-home message, I think, through all of this, that we work better together at a landscape level. So ourselves as WWF often just facilitate these kind of projects, bringing together corporate, government, and supply chain partners across the world. And it really has made a difference. And so it was kicked off in the end of 2019, the project. And from the start, it's very much been trying to get the ground up approach to make sure that the projects we're initiating that help drive water security and water stewardship are identified and supported by the regional suppliers. So we hosted a workshop and literally put maps on the pictures, on the tables, and everybody participated in terms of identifying some of the risks and within their catchment. Some of those risks included fire management. Of course, these risks intensify with climate change and through the drought. Also looking at the water quantity in terms of seasonal flows. There's been shifts in when we get our winter rainfall and a little bit through the summer. So how do we manage that collectively to ensure there's enough for the environment as well as for agriculture and society downstream? Also, you'll hear a lot of discussion around those very thirsty trees that have been brought in hundreds of years ago from Australia that suck up and choke many of our catchments. And so the first priority is always to try and cut down those trees, use that wood for other products, and then allow the stream flow to return and restore that area. They're also enhancing the biodiversity. There's also been some risks identified through the more industrial areas around water quality, and in the farming areas around soil erosion, and also exploring the groundwater monitoring. So of course, when a resource is reduced, there's suddenly a rush for the next best option, which is underground water. So we've had a lot of boreholes and drilling happen without effective monitoring. And so how would we manage this, and who can help us drive this change in these two catchments? And so the next point was to appoint a catchment coordinator who can really work with these different landowners and bring these projects to life. And so with thanks to the Courthold signatories, we were able to appoint Stefan in the Koa Bokkerveld, and then Tesco's, through our WWF Tesco's partnership, identified the Groenland area as an important catchment and supplying area for them, and extended their funding options. And then we were able to appoint Reno as well. And so in each of the catchments, these people are,
Shelly,
yes.
Shelly, so sorry, I'm just really mindful of time and
okay, moving on. So essentially trying to drive the change on the ground that's been addressed by the growers. So two different catchments, two different needs, some of them around alien clearing, and both of them together have been around trying to empower locals. So really trying to make it a local project and not just a short-term fix, and have cleared a number of hectares. And part of their role is also to raise the funds to do the work. So each of these coordinators have their salaries and operational costs covered, but it's their role to partner effectively to make sure that we have the funds to keep going. It's a pity I have to rush through this, I'm sorry. But also it's important not only to be clearing the catchments, but also restoring these areas. So otherwise you end up with intense erosion like these pictures at the bottom. And so we're looking at trying to return the biodiversity elements by actively replanting. And that's what it brings me down to how other businesses can get involved and showcase and communicate the work that we're doing in these landscapes, because it is actually really about connecting these stories to the consumers that are buying the products and then expanding that beyond these landscapes. And for future reference, I'll copy this YouTube video into the chat, and I encourage you to take a watch later on. because it's a wonderful video just showcasing some of the landscapes and the biodiversity benefits from the project we've been doing. Thanks. Sorry to go over.
No, that's fine, because it's so, like you say, it's so fascinating, this detail, and we just don't have enough time today. And we have got 10 minutes now collectively, and we have had some questions come through. So we have all of the speakers, plus also we have Connor Linstead, if you might all put your cameras on. We have Connor Linstead from WWF UK Freshwater Specialist, and we have Alex Adam from the Rivers Trust, who's head of water stewardship. And I guess just to have a bit of an introduction to Alex and Connor, who have been working in this space for such a long time now. Sorry, I'm suggesting some age here. Well, both of you, just really interested in your perspective of what kind of actions make the most difference in terms of one takeaway for the attendees on this webinar. What should they be considering? I'll go to Alex first.
So we've got one takeaway. I might try and squeeze in two, if that's
Okay,
all right.
sure.
Yeah. I think first of all, it's making an explicit commitment as an organisation or company to focus on water and water-related risks and opportunities, developing some kind of strategy and getting kind of CEO endorsement and buy into that. So I think that's first and foremost, because I think that's really important in terms of making the business think about it and prioritising. I think the other one, and I'm sorry to say this, is it's actually providing financial and in-kind support to make these things happen on the ground. You know, there's a lot of goodwill that goes into making this stuff happen, but ultimately it does require resources and finances to get the likes of Kate and the other catchment coordinators going out there and doing that good stuff. So I'll leave it there.
Fair point. Thanks, Alex. And Connor?
Yeah, I would just say that the context matters enormously with water. So, you know, catchments vary in terms of their climate and their geology and the types of agriculture. So you can't really specify a set of actions to take. You have to look at what's happening, and not at the farm level, but at the catchment and the basin level, and prioritize and design your actions accordingly, and make sure they're addressing the root causes of those problems that you're facing in those supply chain locations, not just treating symptoms. And I think from the presentations that Shelly and Kate have given really show that you've got very different types of catchments with very different types of actions. Even within the UK, you have there's a whole menu of things that we would need to do.
Yeah, no, really good point. And very helpfully, quite a lot of the questions have been answered in the Q&A and also in the chat box. So thanks so much to Andy and others that have been answering those questions, both Andy's and others. A few that I've noticed that seem particularly relevant, and actually I'm going to pose this one to Alex, just because I know it's really relevant in the context of UK projects, which is a question from Charlotte Henderson on how water utility companies are involved, as they obviously have a significant impact.
Yeah, great. And actually, you know, I know we're talking about food and drink, but all of these catchment projects are bringing about cross-sector, effectively trying to join up as many dots as we possibly can on a cross-sector basis. So for each of the pilot projects in England, we've had either direct water company engagement, so they're kind of involved or supporting the projects, or we're building on existing best practice. So for the work down in the Tamar, that's building on some upstream thinking work with West Country Water. It's fair to say in Wye and Us, Kate, you know, Welsh Water have been heavily involved in some of those farm grants. Similarly in East Anglia, it's a little bit more complex down in Medway, but we have the water companies. But again, how do we bring all these different parties together with that shared ambition, pooling resources, delivering outcomes on the ground? Because actually the solutions to nearly everybody's problems are the same.
Yeah, that's what really strikes me about all of this area. And actually there was a question specifically to Alice on, because you mentioned innovative intersectional solutions. I'm thinking in the question suggested that you did, and the question was whether you could give any examples of those innovative solutions.
Sure. I mean, I think that Kate and Shelly have just really explained exactly what they are and how they look in practice, which is fantastic. One that we're investigating quite closely that does require a little bit more slightly different thinking is how we can incentivize regenerative agriculture practices throughout our supply chain. Very broadly, it's really regenerative agriculture is really about improving soil health, and we know that that has a lot of flow-on impacts for water resources, water quality. Healthy soils are acting like a sponge and reducing flood risk, but then also holding on to it for use in times of drought, things like that. And how we can incentivize that as a retailer isn't necessarily the most simple question to answer. So we're thinking about how we can use our sustainable farming groups. We've got a Tesco supplier network, we've got produce forums. Using those to kind of facilitate a bit of knowledge sharing has been really interesting between our suppliers, thinking about what barriers need to be overcome for those kind of solutions. We've also done projects directly with suppliers. For example, we did one with Branston on potatoes, looking at cover crops, and provided a subsidy essentially to some of Branston's potato farmers, aiming to encourage uptake. And it ultimately ended up with, I think, 650 hectares of land in the UK, which is 10% of total potato land in the UK, and cover crops through this subsidy scheme. So trying to find different ways to make these practices, very much normal farming practice, really. But what's fantastic about these is that they are there's just so many co-benefits. They're great for soils, so therefore great for productivity and yields, which is always fantastic, so good for farmers. But equally, we're looking at net zero benefits, working towards climate change adaptation, reducing impacts on water quality because there's less use of artificial fertilizers and pesticides and things like that. And we're also able to utilize our partnership with WWF to both fund stuff that's happening on the ground, but also think about some of the bigger questions that need to be answered around regenerative agriculture and things like that. So and build up an evidence base. So that's been a really interesting one to watch. I think Regen is like the perfect example of ticking off a lot of boxes and offering lots of solutions.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Andy, I think you also wanted to jump in on this one. Andy Griffiths.
Yeah, just a quick build on Alice. I think the core is actually looking at those multifunctional landscapes. So water is critically important, but putting in the context of landscapes and regenerative agriculture more broadly is really valuable. And as a result, it's much easier to bring together those cross-sector partnerships to Alex's point. So we're seeing already, for example, in East Anglia, there's now over £1 million flowing through into delivery in action. And that's involving 3 of the water utility companies in the region. And then similarly up in Cumbria and southwest Scotland, where we've now got an 8-figure number committed to flow through for delivery in those landscapes, again, including the water utility companies, but a whole range of other sectors who can also benefit from those kind of activities. So really important to think about how we leverage water in the context of broader landscape restoration.
Indeed. And so I'm just monitoring the chat. It looks like there's been an excellent conversation about how to engage food service businesses and the importance of a cast iron business case. Thanks for that, Julie, and thanks for that, Amy, as well. And the flag to the Footprint Media Myco guide, which is really helpful. I've also noticed some other questions have been answered, and very sorry we don't have time to answer all of these questions, but what we'll do is put together a bit of a Q&A off the back of this webinar. So great to see all these questions coming in. Such a fascinating, critically important topic. Last slide for me to share is just to say, firstly, a massive thank you to those supporters of the roadmap that we made it for the launch today. There's a link here. We'll circulate these slides. A huge thank you to the speakers today. And so sorry I cut you off, Shelly, because fascinating stuff. To get involved and find out more, I've popped in the email address of my colleague Rowan, who can help with any of your questions and would love to talk to you, and the rest of the team would as well. Really encourage you to get in touch, and just will leave with a massive thank you for joining and for your time today and for the speakers.